In this lecture, we will be looking at the printmaking process. The lecture itself for this is going to be relatively short. However, for each different printmaking process or procedure, I have included a YouTube video so you can actually see the process. As we read about this, we can imagine our minds, but usually the processes make more sense when you actually see them occurring. So please do take time and look at each of the videos that are included. To begin with printmaking, when we refer to a print, we are referring to an image or design printed from an engraved plate, wooden block, or similar surfaces, and most of these can often be used to create multiple prints. When we talk about the different steps of printmaking, usually these are called stages, meaning stages are the process of creating a print. There are 5 basic processes of printmaking: relief, intaglio, lithography, silkscreen, and monotype. We will be discussing each of these in this chapter. But some other terminology we should understand. The first is impression. This refers to an image that has been transferred through pressure onto another surface. Often this other surface is paper. Next is the matrix. The matrix is the surface upon which the design has been created. And we'll see this will vary from print to print. Sometimes it'll be wood, other times plexiglass, other times copper plate, linoleum, and so forth. Next is what's called an addition. Again, many of these prints are able to be used to create multiple images. An addition is when multiple impressions are made from the same matrix. We also have this idea of an original print. What original print refers to? This refers to the first run of an edition. Usually prints are numbered, so you'll see somewhere on there something like 3 out of 50. That would mean out of a run of 50 images, this one was the 3rd one made. There's also what's called proofs. And what proofs are, they are trial impressions that the artist has made before they've completed the final edition. Traditionally, after an edition has been run, the traditional matrix is usually destroyed or a line is drawn through it so it cannot be reprinted at a later date. This is a practice that has somewhat stopped. Usually, the matrices are kept. That way, if there is a second edition required, the print still doesn't exist. Alright, so let's begin looking at some of the printmaking process. The first is the relief process. Now, a relief process refers to any printmaking process where the image to be printed is raised off the background in reverse. So the raised area is where the ink will actually sit. Think of this as a rubber stamp. When you ink a rubber stamp, it's actually the part that is raised that will be transferred onto the paper. The first of the relief printing process is what's called a woodcut. A woodcut design is drawn onto the surface of a wood block, and then the parts that are to be printed white, meaning not inked, are cut and gouged away. Areas that are to be inked are left elevated. In the mid-18th century, the Chinese developed a technology for actually making color woodblock prints, and they did this from creating multiple blocks. Again, there is a short YouTube video. Please watch this video to fully understand the woodcut process. The next is wood engraving, and this is what's called a white line technique. What happens in this is that instead of being on the flat surface of the woodcut, the drawing is actually on the side to the grainy end of a wood block. And what this does, the lines are then cut into it, and it makes the work appear much more delicate in nature. And an example of this is what we see here. This is a wood engraving of the Noonday Rest in Marble Canyon. And you can see it has this almost softness, delicateness to it. Again, there is a YouTube video, so please do watch that. And then the last one is the lino cut. This is very similar to a woodcut, but instead of using wood, the block is made of linoleum. Linoleum is a softer surface, and therefore it's much easier to cut into. However, in the printing process, since it is so soft, it does wear down very quickly, and you're not able to get as many prints as you would from a woodcut. Color can be added to the lino cut by creating a series of different blocks and then inking them in the different colors. And what we call when we use different blocks of different colors together when they're aligned, this is what's known as a registration. Again, please see the YouTube video. The next process is what's called the intaglio process. Now this is usually more difficult, and what we see here are we have areas that are to be printed are below the surface of the plate. So this is the opposite of the relief where the ink is on the top, and this we're drawing lines or grooves into a surface and the ink will actually go down into these. Okay. How we get a shading in this is we have to use modeling. Modeling and shading are used by using the hatching method. Or there's also the method called stippling. And what this is, instead of the parallel lines used in hatching, what we're going to see is we're going to see dots that are employed. All right, the first of the intaglio process is engraving. And engraving occurs by pushing a small V-shaped metal rod called a bruin across a metal plate. Depending on the size of the rod and the force used, lines can range from very fine to very broad and very coarse. Now the next process is etching. Etching offers a more fluid and free process. However, it is very technically advanced. The artist to do this must be very skilled. Okay? It is a twofold process, and what happens is we have first the drawing and the etching stage. We have a metal plate, and it's coated with an acid-resistant substance called a ground. The ground is then drawn upon. Then what happens, the drawn plate is actually set in an acid bath, and the areas that have been drawn on are actually the acid eats into. The longer the plate is in the bath and the stronger the solution, the greater the width and depth of the line will be. Now the plate can be removed from the bath at any time, and certain areas can be treated with varnish or ground, and that'll stop the acid from eating just those areas. This process is called stopping out. The plate is then resubmerged in the bath, and the acid continues to erode on the areas that have been etched in. Finally, when the plate is ready for printing, the entire ground is removed with a solvent, and what we have left is the print that is made. So what happens is that the ground is removed, we now have the surface, we ink it, the ink goes into the areas created by the etching in the acid bath, and then that is what is applied to the paper. Again, for all of these methods, there are YouTube videos. Please make sure you watch these. All right, the third of the intaglio process is what's called dry point. In dry point, line is scratched into a copper plate with a metal point that is pulled across the surface, not pushed as in engraving. What happens with this is a metal ridge called a burr is produced. And this burr gives the line a rich, soft texture. So a lot of these lines are very soft in appearance. However, once the dry point is being printed, this burr wears away very quickly, and we lose that soft edge to it. Then we have what's called mezzotint. This is actually a negative process. What happens is we have the plate, and the ground is all over the entire surface. Okay, this is done using what's called a rocker. It's a sharp, curved tool, and what happens is that leaves this burr over the entire surface of the plate. Then the image is created by lightening or scraping away the burr itself. So that burr that was just a line in the dry point, the entire work has that softness, and we draw lines into that. The aqua tint is the same idea, but here the entire plate is coated with a porous ground that is dusted onto the plate. And then what happens is this porous ground, it's set into place by heating it. Once this has been set, then the entire plate is set in an acid bath. And what happens is the acid bath, it actually bites around each individual particle and gives the entire work a sandpaper-like texture to it. Line can then be added, but later by etching or dry point. And again, please see the YouTube videos. Next, we have what's called lithography, which literally means stone writing. This is a planographic printing process, which means the printing surface is flat. This was actually discovered on accident in the 1790s because an artist was trying to find a cheaper method of a printing process, and he was looking for something that he could reuse. And there were stones around him, and he actually drew on them with this greasy substance, and he realized this was something he could reuse. Because what happens in lithography is you have a flat stone and it's drawn on with a greasy crayon. Then the entire stone is treated with nitric acid, water, and gum arabic. What happens is then this entire stone is inked. Well, the ink only sticks to the greasy surface and not the treated stone. Therefore, when you go to print it, the ink is only on the greasy part and it is then on your paper. What's interesting enough is this acid that is used does not cut into the stone itself. So when you're done, you can actually wipe the entire stone clean and reuse it. Alright, then we have what's called silkscreen printing or serigraphs. This gets its name, the Greek for to write, which is the graphos, and the Latin word for silk, which is the seri. And what happens in this, we are most familiar with this by t-shirt printing. Many t-shirts are created using this silk screening process. What happens in this is a shape is cut out of a piece of material, and then that shape is reproduced onto other surfaces by spreading ink or paint over the cutout. In silkscreen, the inks are very thick, so they will not run into the other areas. And they must be pushed through the silk with a squeegee. And that's the image you can see here. And again, I have included a YouTube video. And then finally, we have what's called a monotype. A monotype is different than the other printing processes because the other processes we've been talking about, you can reprint and reprint. But a monotype is just what it sounds like. It is one. And what happens in this is that you can use, it still uses a plate and a press to create an image, but the image is only printed once. And why this is so is because the image is actually created on the plate itself by using either inks or paints. So you apply it, you press it, put it through the press, and it goes onto your paper, but then when you're done, it transfers the ink or the paint onto the paper from the original plate. So there is no image remaining to reprint. Again, I have attached the YouTube video. This chapter, relatively short. In the textbook, you are going to see examples of all of these. But finally, I have included these YouTube videos because I believe they'll help you understand each of the processes as you see them.